Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. On the GSMC Podcast Network, I am their host that you hear on Tuesdays and Fridays. Is Ethan back with you once again, discussing all of the fantasy duds, fantasy studs, starts, the guys who you wish you started, and the whole 9 yards. So we're discussing all those things today, man. Fantasy was up and down last week. We had a couple teams on bye, so the Raiders, the Chargers, the Saints, and you can see a drastic effect in how people's lineups ended up being due to the bye weeks. Mine was drastically affected, but also my team was affected by different reasons as well. I'll get into that in probably like 10 seconds. But, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, I hope everyone's having a great day while you're listening to this. If you're not, I hope it gets better for you. You know, keep your head up, keep strong. It's tough times, and we'll make it through. But let's talk some fantasy. Let's get off the heartfelt stuff right here. Fantasy football, man. What happened to me last week? Well, a lot of pain. Fantasy football pain, that is. So let's keep in mind. I still have two commodities on my team, two roster spots left to play this week in my ESPN Fantasy League, where I am 4-1 currently, but by the end of the day, I will be promptly 4-2, as I got a complete and utter beatdown on Sunday. I went up against Derrick Henry, so if you're playing fantasy football, you know what happened. He dropped the 40-piece, had a 94-yard touchdown run, had another touchdown in overtime. It was not fun. That was not fun. I went up against Fuller, who had 24 points. I went up against the Tampa Bay defense that had a straight-up 20-piece against Green Bay. Not great. And for the most part, the rest of his team had a pedestrian performance. He had Cam Newton, who also scored a rushing touchdown for his own self, which bolstered his numbers for a bit. But for a while, Cam Newton was struggling in fantasy. And for the most part, that's a pedestrian day for someone of Cam's repertoire, I would say, for myself. But my team is just not great. I have Kansas City's defense left to play against Buffalo. Don't know what to expect from them. I have Greg Zuerlein against Arizona. Don't really know what to expect, but maybe for my own sake, maybe I can get about 20-something points from field goals. Who knows, right? I don't have any Cowboys offensive weapons anymore. Rest in peace, Dak, on my team. I changed my team name to Do It for Dak, because we have to do it for Dak, because he helped me so much. In fact, if I had Dak on my roster right now, which technically I still do, haven't dropped him yet, I feel too bad. He just kind of has to be there. Might have to bite the bullet. But, my replacement for Dak Prescott so far has been Baker Mayfield, because I received him via trade with Ronald Jones Jr. Ronald Jones II. I'm not having a lot of fun, right, with the Baker Mayfield experience. 119 passing yards. Got to give him the 8 there. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. He had 5.26 fantasy points right there. It's just been a horrific day. It's just a horrific day for that whole offense. Cleveland was just wrecked. So this is the second time in the season now where they've been wrecked by a team that just kind of looks better than them. And, they've gotten their wins. They've been able to play and win against, the teams, I guess, next to their level. So I guess that's the biggest thing, right? If they want to beat teams that are Steelers-like, Ravens-like, who are both in their division, mind you, Cleveland really has to find the next guy that's not Baker Mayfield, because he is hindering them. Granted, they could not protect Baker on Sunday, but I think a lot of the time, since they know what their team is about, they're about running the ball, they're sending heat at Baker Mayfield to force him to throw the ball. Beat us with your arm. Beat us with making the right reads. They take away his first read all the time, and that's the problem with a lot of these Oklahoma quarterbacks coming out of the draft. A lot of them end up being first read guys, and if Baker's not as athletic as a Kyler Murray, he can't also just run out of pressure with his feet and make something happen. Now, Cleveland is saying that Baker wasn't all the way healthy, the broken ribs, or the ribs were bruised, whichever one you want to choose. He was not all the way healthy, and thus he could not perform the way that we would expect the Baker Mayfield to perform against Pittsburgh. I don't really know exactly how to phrase that without it sounding a bit redundant, because he performed just about how most people would expect Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns to perform against a defense of that caliber. But here we are. So, yeah, that started off the day pretty rough, Baker Mayfield's performance. Darrell Henderson had 88 rushing yards, only 9 points. That was a weird game. We'll talk about that a little bit. The Rams losing to San Fran, which I said on Friday's pod was that, San Francisco was kind of in a win, has to win mode. They had to win that game. If they went down and were forced to basically split at best between the Cardinals and the Rams, they were going to be in a tough situation. And now they're 3-3, and the narrative is definitely not going to be anywhere close to what it would have been if they would have lost. Cam Akers. So the Cam Akers watch, he had nothing on Sunday, legit nothing. So I don't really know what to make of that backfield just yet. All the reports were saying that this might be Cam Akers' backfield soon, but that wasn't very encouraging. So who knows, man? Who knows? But Ronald Jones, man, my pickup from last week, I didn't really mention it too much, but I got Ronald Jones. And 26 points for Ronald Jones. Excellent day for him. 113 yards. Rushing 2 rushing touchdowns. Great. Excellent. Had Kenny Golladay, 14.5 points for 4 receptions, 105 yards. They didn't really need to do too much in the air. Jacksonville's defense was non-existent. Detroit kind of had their way with them. A little bit sad. I had Chenault in, which might be my, it shouldn't change the outcome of my loss here this week, unfortunately. But I had Chenault in, who only had 4 points. It was tough, but he might get better as the season goes along. And I had AJ Green, because I picked him up because he was dropped in my league. 17 points off the bench, not in my lineup. I was debating between him and Preston Williams, who in reality, Preston Williams only had 2 catches, but at least he had a touchdown against the New York Jets. Because, hey, if you're playing the Jets, I can't honestly look at those points and say, yeah, I don't want that, because it's the Jets. The Jets, honestly, are one of the most depressing storylines that I've seen in my times watching pro sports. When it comes to anything that's not, natural disaster related, or anything that was potentially someone passing away, just straight up football, straight up sports. This is depressing. What do you do as a Jets fan? You're watching your team essentially have to make a decision on a head coach that's just so bad. Everybody knows they're bad. They hear it every day. The front office sees news reports, sees the talking heads, sees the opinionists, sees the columnists, all saying that Adam Gase stinks. He has to go. And they just won't do it. And probably because they're trying to be so bad to where they secure the number 1 pick, and then they move on. right? Then they move on, Adam Gase. So a lot of people think that Adam Gase's job is not, in fact, safe through the full regular season, but they're going to wait this thing out, see if they can secure the number 1 pick, probably by like week 12. And then, they tap out. They say, you know what? I'm done. Don't need Adam Gase in the facilities anymore. And we'll just interim head coach, probably still find a way to lose out, and that will be the end of it. So what does that mean for Sam Darnold? I don't know, because if they get the number 1 pick, which the Jets are definitely on pace to do, mind you, Trevor Lawrence, what does Trevor Lawrence do? He looks at this Jets team, especially if there's no time, like, we don't know what the Jets will do with Adam Gase. Like, let's be completely true here. We're all assuming that he has to be gone. And hopefully that is the case for Jets fans. But there's still no real idea of when he was supposed to be gone, if he is going to be gone at all. Adam Gase coaches that team like he does not want to be there. In fact, the last Thursday night game that he played in, where he put Sam Darnold back in the game after getting thrashed on, legitimately looked like a desperate attempt to win a game, and he still lost. So I don't really know what that does for you as a Jets fan. I don't know what that does for you as the Jets organization. You're looking at a coach who is legitimately coaching dead in the water. His team doesn't believe in him. The 2 stars that they did come in with this year are not happy, and they left. You had to literally waive one. You have to cut a player. You traded one away for a pretty decent haul, but you had to trade your best player on your franchise in like the last, I don't know, since Revis, maybe? Yeah, you had to trade him away. What are you doing? Like, what do you do in this situation? You have no choice but to get rid of Adam Gase. But then the tough questions come, because your roster is still kind of, you don't know what you have. Because honestly, Adam Gase was a poison that I just never thought it never stops. Like, it never stops. What do we have in Sam Darnold right now, right? We don't know if Sam Darnold's good or not, because of just the fact that his first 3 years was in this Jets organization that constantly put him in horrible situations. Now, granted, Sam Darnold's still a young quarterback. He still has time. And some things are not Adam Gase's fault. Like, when people play on the field, Adam Gase is not a football player. He is a coach. All he can do is tell his players to execute a job. At the same time, there's so many other factors involved. The belief, like, the players don't look like they've bought in at all. I don't blame them. The body language around the team looks horrible. And honestly, Sam Darnold looks punch drunk. He looks like he's been hit too many times. He doesn't want to throw the ball, stand in the pocket, because his offensive line is not great. There's no chemistry. And the few chemistries he has with certain receivers, it only goes for so much. Sam Darnold was a prospect that people had a lot of ideas in. Like, he came in a raw prospect, right? He came in less of like a Andrew Luck, which is one of the best quarterback prospects we've had ever, right? He was no finished product coming out of the league, but we knew what his capabilities are and what he had. And I still think he's a really good athlete for his size, and I still think he has such a cannon of an arm. I would love to see him in a situation that wants to see Sam Darnold grow. Because as of right now, I guess the Jets' idea is thinking that tank for, Trevor Lawrence is the way. And it'd be a real shame if Trevor Lawrence finds himself in a situation where the Jets are back at square one again. And I think the best thing for them to do is to they need to be calling and inquiring about head coaching positions right now, off the record, because they got to figure that part out first. That part has to be figured out first, because if it's not, then you're going to run into a whole nother trouble of trying to figure out who is the guy at coaching, because if he can't find that one out, and the owner finds another dud at the head coaching position. But honestly, I think it'd be really, really tough to find another coach that's just not good like this. Maybe Freddie Kitchens, right? Maybe. They just have to go. The whole coaching staff has to go, mind you. Greg Williams has to be out of the league. That defense has no morals out there. It's not good. Oh gosh, the Jets. I feel for the fans because I couldn't imagine. I legit could not imagine how that is. But we're going to take our first break here in the podcast, and we're going to come back talking about studs and duds. Who were some studs for you on Fantasy Week 6? We'll talk about that soon. GSMC will be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, y'all. We're back. GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. And we're about to get into some studs and duds, man. Some big-time starter performances across the fantasy football leagues. And some not-so-big fantasy performances from the rest of the leagues. You know what I'm saying? So, we got to start it off with Derrick Henry. So, Derrick Henry has been... People don't really talk about him too much. Recently they've talked about him more, of course. But, in the first few years of his league, especially, coming off a Heisman Trophy, he wasn't selected until the 45th pick. And even though we've seen that his capabilities as a runner, pure runner, he's still the best pure runner in football to me right now. He's the best pure runner to come into the NFL, probably since Adrian Peterson. And I don't know if I'll get some slack for that, but that's just how I feel. Derrick Henry was insane last week. We talked about it in the first segment, but he put his stamp on early in week 6. So for 264 total yards, 2 touchdowns, and he ended up giving a huge win, 40-34 in overtime over Houston. The 94-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter was the biggest play of the game by far. And then Henry scored a 5-yard scoring run, which they just snapped it to him. Like they just snapped it to him. Who needs Ryan Tannehill when you have Derrick Henry, right? So, he scores plenty of touchdowns from distance. He's up to 47 regular season touchdowns for his career, and 10 of them have been from 53 yards or more. And today's distance call wasn't even the longest in his career. Remember, he ran for 99 yards against the Jacksonville Jaguars 2 years ago, and he had a 74 and 75-yard touchdown run last year. So he's just insane, man. And, apparently they call him Tractor Rico. They call him John Deere has nothing on this guy, apparently, in between the tackles. And it's just crazy. And also, the person who's on top of his game in that offense is not only just Derrick Henry, but also we have to talk about their quarterback, man. Their quarterback has really figured out a way to just blow all expectation out the water. When I thought that Tennessee might be able to get back to the AFC Championship game, it was not just going to be because they ride Derrick Henry like they did last time, but it was also because their quarterback play would have to be better. right? We'd have to expect Ryan Tannehill to be a better quarterback amongst the rest of the league and really showcase what he showed before the playoffs. And what ended up happening was he's done more than that. Ryan Tannehill has looked so awesome this year. You know, he's had 364 yards last game against Houston, 4 touchdowns. Buffalo, 195, but 3 touchdown passes. In Minnesota, they had 321, but no touchdowns. 239, 4 touchdowns against Jacksonville, and 249 against Denver. Now, the toughest team they played thus far in the season is Buffalo. They have Pittsburgh coming up, then Cincinnati, then Chicago, and then Indianapolis, and then Baltimore. So the only real easy winnable game I can see from them thus far is, well, when I say winnable, I mean cakewalk type game. Cincinnati's defense is still bad. Joe Burrow can't be protected, but even though the protection was a bit better this week, and you saw what was capable of, a lot of points were put up in both sides of that game. Yeah, I still like Cincinnati, though. Don't get me wrong. But Pittsburgh is going to be their toughest bout until they get to Baltimore. And then, honestly, their schedule is very favorable for the remainder of the year. So it's very possible that Tennessee could potentially run a huge table. I'm not saying they can go, 17-0, but they look one of the sharpest teams in the league by far. Them and Pittsburgh look like they can't skip a beat. Now, Pittsburgh did take a big-time loss in their linebacker core yesterday, unfortunately. And it's going to be a tough ride for them sooner rather than later, because if they can't stay healthy, things will get bad. But we got to say, it's just how, the Pittsburgh has so many awesome players. So it's crazy to think that primary Steelers, how many primary Steelers have had little to no role in their rotation. So Deontay Johnson had a back injury, didn't play. Juju Smith-Schuster had 2 catches for 6 yards, and he remains an afterthought. Eric Ebron finished with 9 yards. But Pittsburgh's offense still showed plenty of octane. So James Conner, who had 20 touches, 110 yards and a touchdown. Benny Snell added a short touchdown run, and Chase Claypool, again, 81 total yards, a touchdown run was heard from again. So this guy is going to be all over the field. James Washington had a 4 reception, 68 yards, 1 touchdown day. And it'll be difficult to trust whenever, Deontay Johnson comes back. And the gift and the curse of too many good players is that's what you get. There's just too many options. Ben Roethlisberger sat back and threw for just 22 passes on Sunday. That's it. 162 yards and 1 touchdown pass. And for all the talent on his offense, Roethlisberger might not be a great fantasy player, but the Steelers are menacing on the ground, and their defense wins their games majority of the time. So Cleveland might deserve a pass for this bad game, but we have to have a discussion about Baker Mayfield. 10 of 18, 119 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. 4 times he was sacked, and a 54.9 passer rating. And it's clear that Baker Mayfield's ribs weren't comfortable on Sunday, but the Steelers did plenty to hit and confuse him. Mayfield was eventually pulled from the second half, and likely to his own well-being, or for his own well-being, and reminded us of the Jimmy Garoppolo benching last week, mercy pull, so to speak. And, we don't really know what Baker Mayfield is at his best. So is he a league average quarterback? Is he not a statue in the pocket? Because he's not a statue in the pocket, but is he clearly not a dynamic runner either? So long as he's a man in Cleveland behind center. Odell Beckham probably hasn't capped range. He probably has a ceiling on himself. Odell finished with 2 catches Sunday on 4 targets. Unfortunately, we don't get to credit him for his DPI flag drawn or his nifty one-hand catches in the pregame warm-up. So, Cincinnati's defense is middling improved. but it's still below average. The Bengals loom as a get-well spot for Cleveland in Week 7, but Mayfield probably will be touch and go all practice this week. A big-time performance for a guy who I almost traded for, but instead I ended up getting Ronald Jones, was DeAndre Swift. So it might be happening, people. It might be happening. So Adrian Peterson to have a role on a football team is not a bad thing, even the Lions. But it's time Detroit let Adrian Peterson settle into his secondary spot, a complimentary gig. Peterson had one more carry than DeAndre Swift at Jacksonville. Peterson went for 40 yards and a short score on his 15 rushing attempts. And while, DeAndre Swift, he had 116 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the Lions are ready to finally pass the baton, I would say. And you can say Matt Patricia is to blame as much as you want, and everybody should probably point the finger to him, as he likes to point fingers alongside. But the Darrell Bevel has a lot of good ideas coming. So recall how well Matt Stafford was playing before last year's midseason injury, and Swift is someone that we want to see take over this backfield. For one thing, it's a bigger threat on the field in the passing game and the rushing game, and TJ Hawkinson might get a little bit more looks too. So that's definitely something that I think would be encouraging for both sides rather than just not. Another thing, let's get into Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones is not somebody that we trust in the passing game, and maybe the Buccaneers don't either, but he has been a really, really good running back for them. And Leonard Fournette might not hurt them when he does come back. So that's just a tidbit. It was nice to see Lamar Jackson do some things on the ground again, but he's blocking the value of the rest of the backfield. And this is a passing game that refuses to offer heavy volume or a dynamic target share into its primary option. So for a name brand team with the sitting MVP, the Ravens are a fairly boring fantasy group right now. And if you have Mark Andrews, it's literally boom or bust. It's ridiculous. Calvin Ridley looked really great, and Atlanta secondary receivers are respectable, but Julio Jones is still the leading singer in the offense, and when he's on the field, it has critical buoyancy. So without him, everyone is asked to step forward one slot, and maybe Ridley can handle that, but most of these other guys can't. And there's maybe some long-term worries about Todd Gurley soon to come. Justin Jefferson has been electrifying. So I have him in my other league, 30 points in non-PPR, almost 40, in 1 point, in 1 point PPR. It's just incredible. So you understand it happened in garbage time. We don't care, right? This is fantasy football. How is he not starting on opening day? With Adam Thielen still relevant and Irv Smith flashing 2 straight weeks, this offense could be really good in 2021, if the Vikings can mercifully move away from Kirk Cousins. They can find a way to get away from Kirk Cousins. The Vikings, man, they might be able to pull something off. And don't be shocked, if the Vikings start smelling something in the water and sitting somebody down, or, whatever the case may be, to find a way. Alexander Madison was the guy to replace Dalvin Cook, and he did get 10 touches. 10 carries should be a pretty solid amount, especially in a game where you're getting blown out. But the entire offense was pretty flat, and, it was a good idea. They fed him pretty well, just wasn't any good results. But, yeah. And then Miami. So Miami had a shutout. The Mike Gesicki shutout. Not so much, though. That wasn't great. Myles Gaskin has become a set it and forget it back in most leagues, and pliable in all game situations and holding some touchdown equity. DJ Shark and Laviska Shenault had a really good volume since somebody was not healthy in their lineup. right? And the results were kind of underwhelming, but it's better to say that DJ Shark would be the best guy coming out of that once his ankle is healthy. And Chenault might be a type of player who could be a post-Halloween boom when he understands the league a little bit better, and the Jaguars have a better idea on how to utilize him because, they use him in the running game and in the passing game. He doesn't really have a consistent touch percentage right now, but James Robinson had his first awful game for him this week, and he still collected 53 total yards in the touchdown, a playable score in most formats, and not many backs have the same sturdy floor built into their weekly projection. Joe Burrow was able to get some pass protection for himself probably for the first time this week, just 2 sacks against 39 attempts, and that was half the battle for the Bengals, and somehow Cincinnati coaxed a meaningful stat line out of A.J. Green, 8 receptions, 96 yards, and that didn't end up hurting T.J. Higgins at all. So he had 6 receptions for 125, and it's the most explosive down the field option. So it might be wise to probably still find a way to move off of A.J. Green, but I'm still going to try and keep him because I think A.J. Green has something to prove. But we're going to take another break here in about 30 seconds, but real quick, let's throw in, Cam returned to New England, but the fun didn't really return to the Patriots offense. Newton was the only runner to get volume, and there wasn't enough verticality in the passing game, and the Patriots struggled to score points against a defense that it's no longer elite. Drew Lock fashioned for 34.9 in the passer rating and threw critical picks late, but the Broncos escaped anyway. So that's pretty something else. But we're going to take another break and come back, and we'll continue on talking about fantasy football here at GSMC.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, let's continue on here, GSMC Fantasy Football Nation. So we're just talking about how Cam Newton and the Patriots didn't look too great in a loss against the Denver Broncos, and the Broncos almost tried to give it away. Drew Lock looked pretty bad in his first game back, threw a lot of picks late, but the Broncos ended up escaping with a win anyway. So we don't really know how well or how much the Broncos are committed to Melvin Gordon, but Philip Lindsay is probably their best running back so far. And Tim Patrick, for 101, might be in the wide receiver 3 conversation moving forward, and no matter what the team's quarterback situation looks like. So that might be pretty interesting. Devonta Freeman, I should say. Devonta Freeman has all the volume that you would want to see in a situation what the Giants have, but their run blocking really is not great. You're looking about at a 50 to 60 yards a week with a tiny bit of touchdown equity, and if you fancy yourself a fantasy championship contender, you need better, and these are mostly empty calories. David Montgomery, the rich man's Devonta Freeman, a tier higher, but you're not really winning anything substantial with him, unfortunately. And that hurts because I have him, and I can definitely agree. This was the week to see if David Montgomery had the stuff possible, right? And unfortunately, he did not this week. He had 19 touches, so he had all the volume, only 58 rushing yards. And he was targeted 5 times in the passing game, 4 receptions for 39 receiving yards. It just was not enough. They did win, and the Bears just look like a weird team, man. They're just a weird, weird team. To have this many wins, but they just don't look like they have the it factor. And I think that's the biggest thing, for sure. Kyle Allen. So, Kyle Allen, we can't say he's good, but he's earned the right to play over Dwayne Haskins as far as Washington. At least gives you an honest effort every week. And that, that fits with the MO of a Ron Rivera coach team. Antonio Gibson remains in the timeshare with J.D. McKissick and holding back every week graduation papers. So, and it wasn't a perfect game from Travis Fulgham, who had 6 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown, but he combined 10 targets, or he commanded 10 targets, and he did it against a respected defense. And, we shouldn't care about when the name players return. Fulgham needs to stay on the field and stay relevant. Carson Wentz is someone who is going to keep this story afloat. Miles Sanders and Zach Ertz are headed for MRIs and rotten times with a Thursday night game coming, so it's very likely that neither one of them probably play. And DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson flip-flop their usage and returns from their previous week, though no one scored a touchdown. So they're kind of like 1A and 1. They're like 1 and 1A, and arrange them how you would like. But even with Curtis Samuel out, the Panthers couldn't find another downfield option to step forward last week. So that's kind of all your big beats for week 6 going forward. And let's talk about some guys who are going to be coming off of their bye week. So Josh Jacobs is going to be coming off a bye week, and they're going to be playing against Tampa Bay. And I mean the Raiders. Now, the Raiders have been looking like a tough out as of yet, but a lot of times they haven't played a defense, I feel, that is extremely strong, as well as like in the pass rush. So Tampa Bay's pass rush is unbelievable. Like, you could see it in their first game against New Orleans. You definitely saw it in their game against the Chargers, where once you get a pass rush on, Justin Herbert, he starts to look a little bit more like a rookie, and, they can't really protect him that well. And now, against Aaron Rodgers, they swallowed Aaron Rodgers. It was not even close. They swallowed him whole. It was insane. I've never seen a team just look defeated. And, there were some highlights from that game that you just were like, whoa. Like, what happened in that game? It was just not good. And it makes you, games like this really make you reconsider what exactly is happening across the NFL and what's happening specifically in the NFC. The NFC, last week, I thought the NFC West was the strongest conference by far. Or should I say the strongest division by far in the conference. And now I don't even know who is, if they have a strong conference. Maybe it's just teams. And even now, I could sit here and say that Kansas City, the Ravens, the Pittsburgh, and Seattle, those are your best 4 teams, and then throw in a 5th, Tennessee. We can all say those are the best 5 teams in the NFL, mostly based off of record alone. And half of them could lose next week, and everything feels like everything's up in the air. Like, usually by week 5, week 6, we know what teams are, and we know what their weaknesses are. And right now, we know things, but also we feel like we should know who's going to come out here and win games. And it's getting crazy. Like, we thought we had Green Bay figured out. Green Bay, obviously, they're not going to face a team that great in the pass rush again, but that is a bit concerning, right? That doesn't bode well for what is exactly to come out of that team. But yeah, man, it's a tough go, definitely. A tough go, a tough out. And that just was very discouraging. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me about this whole thing, is that every game I come into each week thinking I know what the league is looking like, and then a game just flip-flops. Same thing with the Rams game. I thought the Rams were really good. And then the 49ers, who, on paper, when healthy, are supposed to be really good. But they're not very healthy right now, but they went and took it to them, and they went out there and got a win. Like, they just went and took it, which, more power to them, right? Like, I can't blame them for going out there and getting it done. But I really thought that the Rams were going to be really going toe-to-toe with the Seahawks real soon, and that was going to be a big-time thing. So, yeah, man, Josh Jacobs, you don't want to sit your studs. That's not what I'm suggesting here, because if I started my personal stud just off of name value in A.J. Green, I probably would have a better chance to win this evening. But that is not the case because I did not do that. Russell Wilson was on bye, and he goes up against Arizona, so that's interesting. The Cardinals' defense is still up in the air. Question marks all over the field. Chandler Jones is out for the season, I believe, so that's bad for them for sure. And I don't really know what to say about the Seattle defense. They're not great, and if Kyler Murray is on his best brand of football, we might see ourselves another shootout waiting to come. That wouldn't surprise me. So just keep that in mind. And for the foreseeable future, the Seahawks' rest of season, as their bye week is done. After this week, they play San Francisco, Buffalo, the Rams, Arizona again, Philly, the New York Giants, New York Jets, Washington, and the Rams. So circle weeks 13 through 15 for sure, maybe even 12. They're going to be really good. They're going to have all the fantasy points that you want. DK Metcalf is looking like he's going to clear 1,500 receiving yards. Easily. Seahawks look great. The Miles Sanders stuff is tough. I'm not a fan. I don't know who would be a fan of that, but that hurts bad. But it's just a tough beat. You don't really know what to say about it, other than hopefully things change along the way. Looking at New Orleans real quick, let's get into them. So a lot of bye weeks all around. New Orleans is one of the bigger fantasy teams with bye weeks because, Michael Thomas should be slated to play, all things considered, this coming week up against Carolina. And that would be really huge for the Saints as they need this bye week to get everything under control. Emmanuel Sanders has really emerged as a guy that Drew Brees can believe in and trust. And we all know about what Alvin Kamara is capable of doing, which is why I need to bring up this bye week. They go up against Carolina, who so far through most of the season has given up the most fantasy points and done the most damage had the most damage done to them by running backs in the first 6 weeks of the NFL season. And thus, we can only assume that Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray are going to be really, really strong candidates in that sort of area. For rest of season, Carolina, Chicago, Tampa Bay again, San Francisco, Atlanta, Denver, Atlanta again, Philly, Kansas City, Minnesota, Carolina. There is not a game where I don't see the Saints potentially wetting the bed and losing. But hopefully this bye week has done them well because they've done a lot of damage to themselves. They're too talented, honestly, to not win games. So hopefully they figure it out. Same deal with Michael Thomas. Once he gets on the field, I think their team will be a lot different. And they'll be facing a lot of teams that can't handle the pressure of having a number one wide receiver like that. I don't think Denver is going to be any healthier anytime soon. So, and Atlanta doesn't really handle well defensively against good wide receivers. They play them twice. Philly is a injury city, is a mess over there. Kansas City is going to be a really, really tough game. It's probably their toughest game on paper. And that's just where this team is at. They have all the potential in the world to win games and to be really good fantasy relevant players. And unfortunately, that also means that, all you can say is keep going. All you can say is keep going and hoping, because at the end of the day, it's up to them to come through for you. And I'm saying this not only as a Saints fan, but as a fantasy player. It's just that sometimes you'll see a line like all last year, right? Even though Alvin Kamara was clearly not under the best, he was not having his best year as far as physically, health-wise. But he kept, his point value was, his projection number was always around 17 points. Did he get there most times? Sometimes, But right now, his average point value is 29.9. Like, he averages almost 30 points a game. I know he did have 2 big weeks back to back that skews this, but it's nothing to scoff at. He's been complete excellence for all of this season thus far, and he's a big reason why they are 3-2 and not 2-3. And I can only imagine that they get better from here on out. It's hard for me to think that a team gets worse from after the bye week, especially when a lot of their mistakes are not mistakes that look to be repeatable. Like, they have to get the secondary stuff figured out. And once that happens, it gives more opportunities for the offense to score points, because a lot of the times their defense can't get off the field. Their first and second downs are great, and their third downs, they're giving up 10 yards a pop. It's horrible. Absolutely abysmal for fantasy production when your defense can't get off the field. So by the time they do that, that's when things will be better. And hopefully we see a lot of big fantasy explosions, especially for me, who also has Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas on his team. So we'll see exactly what is going to happen there. And I just can salivate over the idea of having a team of Ronald Jones, Alvin Kamara, Kenny Golladay, Michael Thomas, and even AJ Green if he's healthy, right? Not healthy, but if he can get right in this offense. So that's what I'm feeling right there. That sounds good. Sounds great. Fantastic, mind you. All right, so we're going to take another break, and it'll be our final break of the podcast, and we'll come back and we'll discuss this doubleheader on Monday night, because I'm recording this, or I'm taping this Monday, and I'm just going to talk about the matchups, the games, what's the storylines before the game starts, and then, of course, you'll hear this Tuesday, so we'll know the results by then. But GSMC will be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We're back and doing our final segment here. We're going to be talking about the last 2 games of Week 6. We have Kansas City, I believe, at Buffalo, right? Is that true? Yeah, Kansas City is at Buffalo at 5 p.m. So by the time I'm taping this, they'll play in like a couple hours, which is crazy to think. A 5 p.m. Monday night game, first game of the slot. And then we have a Monday night game again right afterwards. 2 Monday night games. What awesome, right? Great. Fun. I love it. That's crazy. But yeah, man, Dallas is at home against Arizona. So those 2 games are going to be big implication stuff, because a lot of us fantasy managers who had Dak Prescott have to see what Andy Dalton is going to do. See, I didn't get a chance to get Andy Dalton in the league I needed him in. I did get him in a league where I already had Russell Wilson, but he was on bye, so I had to go find another quarterback. And Dalton was just sitting there for the taking. So I said, why not? The upside potential could be there. And I'm curious to see just exactly what he is able to do with this offensive weapon, this armory, this complete, complete choose your pickings weapons here, right? So it's going to be an interesting game. Arizona's defense is not that great. They don't have Chandler Jones. We talked about this last segment. And they have not been able to really stop anybody, right? If we look at Football Outsiders, right, and go to team defense for statistics, and we just look at where everybody is at this year, Arizona is 20th in team defense. And, if you look at their DVOA, they're only at 3.6%. And last week they were 19th, so they've gone down one. And their defensive average, their pass percentage, right, is not great. So they have a 17.7% pass defense, and it's ranked 26th in the league. And their rush defense is a negative 15.5%, which is ranked 13th. So their non-adjusted total and rankings are about a 9. And their rank for their schedule, strength of schedule defense is 29th. So it's pretty horrible, right? It's not great. Dallas offensively was on a tear with Dak Prescott. That is to be without question, and we already know this. So what does this mean for Andy Dalton and the gang? I think that just means that we're about to see if Andy Dalton has stuff left in the tank. And I'm not going to sit here and argue why Cincinnati moved off of Andy Dalton or not. That's out of the question. We know why that happened. They wanted a new regime. They wanted a new face of the franchise. And they traded, or they let the Red Rifle go. But this might be the most impactful hire of the 2020 offseason that was last year, or this past offseason. Because if Andy Dalton can get the ball rolling and look like the Andy Dalton that we know who can play football, like this guy is not some rookie. This guy is not some, third stringer that doesn't get play time. This guy started last year, and he started for years. He's gone to playoffs. He's had success. Now, this is somebody who really can just do his job. Like, this is a professional football player right here. And I don't mean to say that as a cliche. Like, yeah, they're all professional football players. But this guy, he got the job done in Cincinnati for foreseeable future, or for the future that he had with them, and he had success. He's played with star wide receivers. He's played with guys who demand the football a certain amount. So I don't really think it'll be that bad. Like, no, he's not Dak Prescott. He doesn't have that same athleticism. But this is not the same thing as saying, wow, we don't have Patrick Mahomes anymore, so now we have to put in whoever their backup is. Like, this is very different. Feels very different, honestly. And I think the Cowboys will be in a lot better shape with Andy Dalton right now than they would be with some other backup. And I think that, we kind of get into doomsday prep a lot when it comes to fantasy football, when it comes to injuries. Like, oh my gosh, Christian McCaffrey's hurt. What's going to happen to the Panthers offense? Oh, they're just going to tank. It's going to be horrific. And the Panthers have looked arguably better than they did with Christian McCaffrey in the lineup. Granted, I don't think that's 100% the case. I think that they just figured some things out without him, and then they'll be good with him as well. But yeah, people are going to start thinking about the Ewing theory all over again with this Dak Prescott thing, and maybe they get better without Dak Prescott than with him. I'm pretty sure this is going to positively affect, Ezekiel Elliott, as long as Ezekiel Elliott wants to be positively affected. He has had a weird season comparative to him. Like, the numbers look fine, but he just does not look like the same running back even from a year ago. And I don't know if that means his health is in question or whatever the case may be, but, this should be prime position for him to go get some touches. On the opposite side of the coin, or the flip, coin toss, the teams, Arizona. So Arizona's rushing attack has been pretty bad outside of Kyler Murray. So they are not a very good rushing team outside of him. Like, he accounts for probably the majority of their rushing yards. Like, that's pretty bad. Well, it's not bad, right? Lamar does the same thing and they win games. The thing about it is, you kind of want to see some more from Kenyon Drake. There's more to be desired from Kenyon Drake. And Chase Edmonds has soaked up so much of the passing game outside of that running back position that is just kind of insane, right? Like, I don't really know what else to say about that. If we go to offensive DVOA, the Cardinals are pretty high up there for a team that, well, they're like top 20 in the league, but a lot of their point values unfortunately come off of the fact that their passing game is so good, right? Let's look at this. I'm sorry, their rushing is good, but it's from, unfortunately, their quarterback position. So they're 7th right now in rushing ranking, and that's awesome. But until they get the guy they paid $13 million for 1 year to really produce for them, I don't know how far they can take that. You don't want Kyler Murray running all the time. And their passing offense is ranked 17th. So that's not too great. I don't really know. Thing is, though, Dallas is so abysmal on defense, and there's no change in that coming anytime soon, that I have to assume that everyone's going to have a better day, a better chance to be good. So I think that everybody involved on that offense is going to have some look toward success. So DeAndre Hopkins is going to have some success. Christian Kirk is going to have some success. I hope that Kenyon Drake has some success for him. Chase Edmonds looks like he's going to have success. And then, Kyler Murray's going to do his things too. So that's just the end all be all. Dallas defense is horrific. It's not great. And you don't want any parts of that if you are on the opposite end of that defense, right? If you are their offense, they have been down bad for a while. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, right? So their DVOA ranking is 24th. They have a 6.7% DVOA. They rank 23rd in pass or rush defense. They rank 20th in pass defense. And as far as this metric, and it's a pretty good metric to know just who's good and who's not. Like, if we look who's at the top of the top as far as defenses are, a lot of them still make sense. Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, Baltimore, Washington, Chicago, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, the Rams. It all makes sense, Let's move on. There's not too much else to talk about when it comes to that matchup in particular, right? So let's continue on. Let's talk about the 5 o'clock one. We kind of started out of order, but Kansas City at Buffalo is going to be an interesting AFC matchup. We're going to see another big-time quarterback v. quarterback matchup. We saw Josh Allen struggle last week on Tuesday against Tennessee, and they kind of kept the ball away from them. They did a lot of possession control, and they do what a Tennessee team with Derrick Henry does. They ran the ball, and they kept possession away, and they did their thing. Buffalo is going to want to try and bounce back for sure. Josh Allen, although he didn't play horrible, he had a pick that wasn't really his fault and kind of, hurt the game. He had 16 fantasy points. It was not great. You expect more from him at this point in the season from what he's given you. And maybe expectations is the thing that is going to hurt you the most, right? You don't want to have to expect things from Josh Allen. At least you didn't want to, and now you have to. And now you're a little bit nervous. Like, what if the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season was not what he actually is or what this offense actually is? We don't know. If you have Stephon Diggs, you're a bit worried, even though he gets the volume. Delvin Singletary is somebody who you want to see a little bit more out of at this point in the season. Zach Moss isn't doing anything. And, it should be his backfield right now. And another big backfield thing is the fact that Le'Veon Bell left the Jets and now he's in Kansas City. I don't know how much he touches the ball much. I wouldn't be surprised if he's just relegated to like really simple run game plays, or even if it's like a few things in the passing game just to keep the defense honest. But I don't really see him doing a lot in Kansas City for the first few weeks because he has to learn that offense. And that offense is one of the more complex offensive schemes in the NFL. This is not something like we saw this with Emmanuel Sanders, right? Emmanuel Sanders came to the Saints with no offseason, no OTAs, and he struggled for the first few weeks of the season getting into, a rhythm with Drew Brees, not knowing all the routes or running the wrong routes, being off the same page, because the offense is difficult. There's a lot of formations, a lot of personnel changes, and now he's starting to get into it. So I wouldn't be surprised if Le'Veon Bell, he takes a while to get there. Patrick Mahomes, I would assume, would be the same person he always has been. And this is against a pretty solid, pass defense. And their run defense has been a lot better in the Bills. Last year, their run defense was not great, and that was one of their bigger weaknesses coming into last year, but they've kind of shored some things up. They've played against competition that is not the greatest, so let's keep in mind they're in the AFC East. So that comes with things like New York Jets, Miami Dolphins. They did play the Rams, and they played the Vegas Raiders, and they played Tennessee. But as you can see, when they played Tennessee, a team that's really committed to running the ball, they had some issues. Now, Las Vegas is committed as well, and so are the Rams. And they were beating down the Rams at first. So we really don't know. Maybe sometimes it's just dependent on what the rest of the team is feeling like. Sometimes it's just matchups, different players, different schemes, and how they run against them. So it might be a little bit different because they use Derrick Henry gets used in all different facets of running, outside, inside. He just does it all. And the Rams are definitely more of a zone running team. So yeah, man, that's kind of what it is. I predict that Kansas City probably will pull this game out, but I don't think it'll be as bad of a watch as the other night was for the Buffalo Bills. And I think that Dallas is going to surprise some people and get a win. I feel like Dallas is going to get a nice win. Andy Dalton's going to look pretty solid. He has a full week of practice. And I don't think they're going to miss that much of a beat offensively. I think Ezekiel Elliott will get a lot of touches, and he'll get some goal line looks that was previously kind of going to Dak Prescott. So here's to that. But that's your GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for this Tuesday. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, man. Keep up. Keep your heads up. Keep going. Keep fantasy footballing. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review the podcast. Follow us on social media, Facebook and Twitter at GSMC Fantasy Football. I'm Ethan. I'll sign out, and I'll see you all Friday. Keep it up, man.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.